In a moment, we will witness the story of the Titanic and its sinking process. We'll see the collision from inside the ship, look at the iceberg that sank the Titanic and the marks it left, then learn through an experiment what happened to those who fell into the water as we pursue the truth. Laughter. Music. Music. The sound you just heard was the distress call sent from the Titanic. With the help of the telegraph, distress signals were sent to nearby ships in Morse code. The Titanic had slowly begun to sink. At the telegraph was Jack Phillips, a 25-year-old young man. He stayed at his post until the communication room was submerged. That young man acted heroically until the very last moment. But nothing he did made a difference. It would not be until 73 years after the Titanic sank that it would be found again. And everything began with the discovery of the wreck, the mysterious story of the Titanic. Music. It all began many, many years ago. In 1912, 111 years ago today, when headlines were printed in bold, "Titanic to make her maiden voyage." The newspapers featured images of the ship and ticket prices. The story of the Titanic was, in fact, one of rivalry. The transatlantic passenger trade was extremely profitable and competitive, carrying wealthy travelers and immigrants alike. Two major shipping companies were in a race. The White Star Line planned to build two ships that would break records crossing the Atlantic. But instead of focusing on speed, they chose a different path. In 1908, the company assembled an army of workers, mostly Irish, with the vision of building a revolutionary passenger ship, the largest, most luxurious, and most comfortable vessel ever designed. "We may not be fast, but who wants to cross an ocean while seasick?" was their motto. Their goal was to dominate travel between Europe and America within 5 years. Eventually, the massive Olympic was launched. At the time, the largest ship the world had ever seen, weighing 45,000 tons and capable of carrying 1,000 passengers. But soon, the company would launch an even greater ship, the Titanic. Nearly 14,000 people were involved in building the Titanic. And when she was launched, 200,000 people gathered to watch. Onlookers said it felt as though the Earth itself was moving. For the people of that era, it was a marvel. Even the ship's anchors weighed 15 tons each. Inside, the Titanic was furnished with the most extravagant items money could buy. Some critics, however, argued that money should have been spent on technology instead of luxury, since other ships at the time were already being built with 4 propellers for better maneuverability. But White Star Line was determined to impress with grandeur rather than technology. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic set out on her maiden voyage from England under Captain Edward Smith. Her destination, New York. She first stopped at Cherbourg, France, then Queenstown, now Cove, Ireland, before heading across the Atlantic. As the ship departed, warnings were given to operators about possible icebergs. Such warnings were common in the North Atlantic and often ignored. At 9:30 p.m., a ship ahead of the Titanic, the Mesaba, reported seeing large icebergs. The warning was received by operators Phillips and Harold Bride, but it was never passed on to the captain, since the operators were busy relaying paid telegrams from first-class passengers to New York. The night grew colder, as if death's cold breath was in the air. The sea was eerily calm, like glass. In the crow's nest lookout posts, 2 watchmen were on duty. Near midnight, one spotted something ahead. It was difficult to see in the darkness, but it was an iceberg. Frederick Fleet rang the bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge. First Officer Murdoch shouted, "Hard to starboard!" in an attempt to turn the massive ship. Though the Titanic was moving at only about 40 kilometers per hour, 22 knots, Its enormous mass made it impossible to turn in time. Just 37 seconds later, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic struck the iceberg on her starboard side. The iceberg sliced the ship like a razor, buckling plates and popping rivets. 5 watertight compartments were breached, and 400 tons of water per minute began to flood in. Captain Smith summoned Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer. After assessing the damage, Andrews confirmed the worst. The ship could not be saved. They had no choice but to abandon ship. Captain Smith ordered women and children to the lifeboats first. Panic spread. In the wireless room, Phillips and Bride continued sending distress calls. The closest ship, the Californian, only 20 miles away, had its operator asleep and ignored Titanic's signals. Another vessel, the Carpathia, responded, but she was 4 hours away. Titanic had barely 2 hours. At 2:20 a.m., the great ship broke apart and disappeared beneath the Atlantic. Only about 700 survived. Over 1,500 people perished, most freezing to death in the icy waters. Later experiments showed that in 12 degrees Celsius, 54 degrees Fahrenheit, water, warmer than the actual temperature that night, a person could survive barely 30 minutes before hypothermia set in. Survivors would have lost motor control, their bodies shutting down rapidly from the cold. Many wondered, was the Titanic poorly built? Tests on its rivets showed they were strong. But the problem was the glancing blow. The ship scraped along the iceberg, and the rivets were sheared off one by one, creating a 9-meter gash. If Titanic had struck head-on, she might have survived. That night, there was no moon. The sea was so calm, it gave no warning ripples against the iceberg. Some scientists argue an atmospheric mirage may have obscured visibility. Ironically, the iceberg itself had broken off from Greenland nearly a year earlier, carried south by the Labrador Current, until fate placed it